talk. Sherwin, I suppose much of what the president said was somewhat predictable, but at the same time he had to convince people of the decision to pull out, because it was, I suppose, as a direct consequence of pulling out of Afghanistan that the Taliban have taken over.
Look, I think there are a number of audiences the president is speaking to, Peter. You have your foreign policy wonks and your political elite who are decrying this decision, perhaps because of the manner in which it has manifested itself, the scenes of chaos we are seeing at Kabul International Airport, people clinging to aircraft carriers as they try to take off on the runway, even reports that we are seeing of people falling from the wheels of those planes as they ascend into the air. And then there is a broader section of the American population that perhaps isn't quite as invested in what is going on in Afghanistan. There is a sense that, you know, this is the longest war in American history, and a sense of fatigue, certainly, and a disassociation, perhaps, is probably a better word to describe how the majority of Americans, particularly in middle America, probably feel about Afghanistan, and might not be quite as acutely engaged. So this was for a very specific audience, the president coming out and defending his decision, saying he stands by this decision. He said the truth is that this did unfold more quickly than we had anticipated. The Afghan military collapsed, sometimes without trying to fight. The U.S. withdrawal, he said, was the right decision. Americans should not fight in a war where Afghans are unwilling to fight for themselves. We gave them every tool they could need. We could not provide them with the will to fight. And that is a reference to the fact that this was an Afghan army, 300,000 people strong, fully capacitated with the investment of billions of dollars from the United States. The latest technology. They had an air force that the Taliban didn't have at its disposal, but the president pointing to the will of the people on the ground, the fleeing of Afghanistan's President Ashraf Ghani earlier over the weekend to Tajikistan, really sort of focusing on the national dynamics that were at play here. Of course, I think lamenting the fact that this has produced very chaotic scenes. He talked about what their plan is to do now, and their plan is to withdraw from Afghanistan to ensure the safety and the safe evacuation of Afghan nationals who have worked with the United States during their journey in the country for the last 2 decades, but also focusing on the broader strategy at play here, to say that our focus is no longer what it was 20 years ago vis-a-vis Afghanistan. The counter-terrorism threat is more global, and that is going to be the focus of this administration. So, no regrets from the initial decision, talking also about the fact that this was a transfer of an agreement initiated under the Trump administration, signing a deal with the Taliban in 2020 for the removal of withdrawal of U.S. troops by May 1st. His argument, President Biden's, Peter, is that had they disavowed that agreement, had they stayed beyond May 1st, that we would have seen a resurgence in the war between America and the Taliban and more American casualties. So very much coming out here defending his decision. Yes, all the elements didn't go according to plan, but not backing away from his decision, arguing that as the fourth president to oversee this war, he was not going to allow it to then be transferred as a problem to the fifth president of the fifth president, certainly since this war began, Peter.
But certainly now he's under obligation to allow some refugees to come from Afghanistan, particularly those that were working with the American military.
Yes, and that is a process that has not been managed fast enough. Just the vetting process to transfer refugees, be they from Afghanistan or elsewhere, the vetting process takes a very, very long time. It's a cumbersome process that the embassy in Kabul is clearly not capacitated, given the turmoil, given the ructions that they are facing in the country, to process those people, the thousands of people. It's not just the ancillary staff that worked with the United States Army, it's their families as well. So this is a process involving tens of thousands of Afghans, and given the strictures that are in place in terms of U.S. refugee transference, a process that couldn't happen fast enough, given as well, Peter, the fact that U.S. intelligence just weeks ago was talking about how Kabul might fall in 6 to 12 months. That was then revised a week ago to say, it could fall in 90 days. And of course, we saw the Taliban take Kabul within a matter of days. So the intelligence failure failure here is, of course, another discussion in terms of what we could have done in the time that intelligence told us we had, as opposed to the reality of the Afghan flag being raised over the capital city in Afghanistan today.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess in the end, to justify the cost, the investment that they put in would have been a hard sell to the American public. Continue it.
Well, so much has still gone into you know, capacitating the Afghan military, you know, stabilizing the government there, investing in, you know, human rights defenders and, you know, the structures that one requires in a democracy. So, you know, you could look at this two ways. Yes, we could have spent more money there, but my gosh, haven't we spent a lot? And look at the returns we are reaping today with the, you know, the quite easy capitulation of an Afghan military that certainly will be a discussion for years to come in terms of the level of investment the United States has made in terms of that. We also heard a little earlier, Peter, from the United Nations Security Council, which issued quite a hard-hitting statement. And I just want to read you the opening line of that statement, if I may. The members of the Security Council called for an immediate cessation of hostilities and the establishment through inclusive negotiations of a new government that is united, inclusive and representative, including the full and equal and meaningful participation of women. They underlined that institutional continuity and adherence to Afghanistan's international obligations, as well as safety and security of all Afghan and international citizens, must be ensured. It's a longer statement. It also calls for unimpeded humanitarian access. There are 18.4 million Afghans, essentially half of the population in that country, that require humanitarian assistance. That, of course, is a big concern for the United Nations, a big concern also around women and girls' rights in particular. You'll remember that the Taliban of old did not allow women to appear in public without the burqa, without a full covering of their bodies, had to be escorted by men, girls, and women were not allowed to attend school. And so a big push, a very, very strong statement coming from the collective 15-member council today that the negotiations that were ongoing under the auspices of the Qatari government in Doha, that process continues, and some sort of transitional inclusive government that includes the Afghan government of old and the Taliban government of new in a transitional format. Look, the Taliban has so much more leverage now, Peter, in terms of these negotiations, so it's difficult to see just quite where women are going to fit into any future iteration of what the Afghan government will come to represent.
And that troop withdrawal, I mean, you were talking about different audiences earlier on. I know that there was some military that were concerned about the withdrawal, that they weren't keen on it, and I suppose their greatest fear has played out.
Very much so. Look, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, various members of the president's own party, the opposition party, even when Trump announced this Taliban deal and the withdrawal, there was criticism from within the Republican ranks that this was not a good idea because of the situation we are now seeing on the ground. Biden, though, making the argument today, Peter, that were this to have happened today or were it to have happened in 5 years or in 15 years from now, the result might very well have been the same. So he is saying that this is very much on the shoulders of the Afghan leadership, that the Afghan political parties were not prepared to come together here. And whether that happened in 2021 or in 2025 or in 2035, the result would have been the same, you know, just based on what he's seeing on the ground today. Peter.
All right. Sherwin, we'll leave that there for the time being. I'm sure there's going to be lots of analysis and people chipping in on what he should or should not have done. But I guess the situation is those desperate scenes that we saw at Kabul International Airport, people clinging onto planes. Very, very sad images indeed. Thank you so much indeed, Sherwin.